Gabe Polsky has a lot of grit and determination. He's going to be here after the film to answer any questions you have, and I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about. Here it is, Red Army.
Regarding Russia, so first of all, I was very nervous about Russia the whole time because for obvious reasons, I wanted Russians to like this movie. Because for me, it would be almost a fraud if they didn't like it. I would feel like, it's a story about them and the Russian people and the history, the people, the soul. And I really wanted to make sure that they connected to it. And I got invited to the Moscow Film Festival after the movie premiered in Cannes, and I was a little bit surprised but happy, obviously. And then I was very nervous leading up to it. And when I went there, there was a press screening before the main screening, which was basically screened in Pushkin Theater, which is the largest theater in Moscow, 2,000 people. It's very prestigious. And there was a press screening. It was filled with a room like this, all press. And afterwards, I was ready for basically anything, and it turned out to be, standing ovation, and the press were really excited, and, they were quite emotional. And so I feel like I, was able to do justice and tell a story that was authentic to that experience, and, really kind of took a lot of weight off my shoulders, and that was great experience. Well, one of the best in this whole process, just because of their connection to the story and the history. So my parents are basically immigrants from former Soviet Ukraine. They came over in 1976. When they came over, they were told that they would never see their parents again, their family. They came over with $500 and a couple suitcases. It was a time, it was right in the middle of the Cold War in 1976, where they were letting some Jews out of there, but nobody else really. And so they got out, and I grew up in the United States. I was born there, and I grew up wanting to be a professional hockey player. Was really serious about it, passionate about it, and I kind of wasn't really interested in my roots. And in the United States during the 80s, it wasn't really a cool thing to say that your parents are from the Soviet Union. So I kind of pushed that aside, but it wasn't until I saw the Soviet Union play hockey on a VHS tape, something that I was passionate about, where it really, made me, it was like a religious experience. To see them on the ice was like profound. There was something really profound in how they played. It was incredibly creative. They pushed sport to a whole new level creatively. It was an art form, not sport. And that really, made me curious about my own roots, and sort of I wanted to know the story, and I was proud of that, and so then when I looked further into the story, and I started making films, I realized that the story had very little to do with hockey. It was really a metaphor for the Soviet experience and how Soviet society, that the story they went through, the friendships, the betrayals, the nature of sport, the meaning of sport to both the people and nations around the world. And really it was beyond politics and ideologies, all the themes you saw in the movie. It was really, at its core, a very human story that was emotional, that was touching, and that really got me excited. I had a short window to decide whether I was going to do this or not, because a lot of the players were going to be there at the same time, and I had a personal contact in the players, and so I asked, I said, can I interview them? And the guy said, yeah, but you got to do it then. So I basically went to the usual suspects. I'm not going to name names, but to people who fund documentaries, and institutional people, companies, and everyone said, no, Soviet hockey, that doesn't seem very interesting. I said, well, it's not really about that. It's about something much bigger. And no, we're not really interested. So the initial part I had to fund on my own because I didn't have time, and so that was, for me, a lot of pressure and very risky. And then after I got some footage, I sort of put some things together and ended up raising some private money to help kind of get it through to the end. I was pretty aware that a lot of the movie would be archival footage, and for me it was important to get stuff that people haven't seen before, that's not like the cliche Cold War footage with tanks rolling and that. I wanted footage that people hadn't seen before, not just here in North America, but also in Russia. So I had a researcher in the United States and in Russia, and the Russian guy was like, I wasn't getting the stuff that I thought might be there, and so I was complaining, and he said, well, why don't you just come out? And I said, okay. So I went out there, and there's a couple archive houses there that are dilapidated, and they're organized, manually, handwritten, cards. They have the, and so I told them what I wanted, and they didn't even know where the stuff was exactly. They would take me to a certain area, and I would take the film down because it was in film canisters, still 35 millimeter, and then they would sit me on this old, like, Steinbeck machine and roll through the film and kind of tape the areas that I like. And that was sort of the process, and I did that for a couple of weeks. But really, at the end of the day, the archive became overwhelming. There was so much of it. I probably actually only saw like 30% of what I got. But you got to just do the best you can. The legacy of Soviet hockey, the Soviet Union, was basically when I asked people, they would say, "Oh yeah, the Miracle on Ice, yeah, when they lost in 1980," and that's really all anyone knows, really, in the United States. That really kind of made me sad because there's a lot of, movies about 1980 Miracle. There's documentaries or this and that, and I really wanted to treat it in a different way. It was an important moment in kind of history, in Soviet hockey history, but it was just a very small part of a much bigger story. And the way I wanted to treat it was different than we've seen before. And really, I felt like I could say a lot more by not saying anything, by going through the facts of the game. We all know those facts already. We know those facts. It's more of I wanted the audience to experience how he may have experienced this game, to be taken through it in this kind of nonverbal way. I just felt, I actually had a cut with the 72 series in it, a little bit through Fetisov's perspective, but I just felt like it's shoe leather. It's not really helping the story. This isn't what it's about. I'm not telling sort of a history of Soviet hockey. That's not what my goal is here. I'm trying to tell a story, that's, interesting and authentic and sort of personal, and that series, I don't think, in Fetisov's sort of career wasn't like a pivotal moment for his life, or, you know what I'm saying, and to illustrate the story that I wanted to tell. So I just didn't put it in, So in the film, you see that Tretiak, at a certain point, he was actually at the height of his career, but he had asked the coach, he said, "Listen, I want to see my family, and is it possible I can train at home?" And basically Tikhonov wanted to send a message. Even if you're the greatest player in the world, the best goalie ever, if you don't follow how I want you to do this, you're gone. And it sent a message to everyone on the team, like, I don't care who the hell you are. In the Soviet Union, our sports system, you're not bigger than the group, So they said, "Okay, fine, go. You're done. Your career is over." So that was at the height of his career, I always say that there should be more, people like Tarasov, not just in hockey, but in life especially. And for me, it was a big inspiration why I made this film, was because I felt like there should be more people and coaches like Tarasov who really encourage creativity, who are visionaries, who try and elevate what they're doing to a whole nother level, and then inspire young people, their players, to achieve beyond what they thought they could achieve, and to really push themselves creatively. Because in North America, I experienced, I played hockey very competitively. I played in Yale, and my experience was that coaches really didn't want you to be creative, and when you did, oftentimes it's shunned, and it's just not a part of the way of sport here. And I think when you see kind of the greatest athletes, they do push things creatively, and Tarasov was one of those men that just, he created this hockey that you saw, and really kind of, it was amazing.